When I was 12, I was diagnosed with and treated for scoliosis.
For years, Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi has been one of the most carefully managed figures on the edges of the British royal family. Charming, well-connected, and ambitious, he arrived in Princess Beatrice's life at exactly the right moment. Or so the story goes. The engagement was announced, the wedding happened quietly, and the public largely accepted the narrative that had been presented to them. A successful property developer from noble Italian stock, a loving stepfather, a devoted husband. Clean, simple, and reassuring. But the truth about Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi has never been quite that simple. And in the months since early 2026, as sealed documents have resurfaced and scrutiny has returned to the House of York with a force that nobody inside the palace walls could fully contain, the carefully constructed image around Princess Beatrice's husband has started to show its cracks. What was once dismissed as tabloid noise is now looking more like a pattern. And the more you look at the full picture, the business dealings, the timeline of his personal life, the questions that journalists have been quietly asking for years, the harder it becomes to accept the polished version at face value. So let's walk through all of it. Because the truth about who Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi really is, where he came from, and what has been happening behind closed doors is a far more complicated story than most people realize. Edoardo Alessandro Mapelli Mozzi was born on November 19, 1983, at the Portland Hospital in London's West End. From the very beginning, his life was shaped by privilege, connection, and expectation. He attended the Dragon School in Oxford and later Radley College in Oxfordshire, two of England's most elite private institutions. He then went on to earn a master's degree in politics from the University of Edinburgh. On paper, his education reads like a checklist for entry into Britain's most exclusive social circles. And that is precisely what it was. On his father's side, Edoardo descends from Italian nobility. His father, Count Alessandro Mapelli Mozzi, is a former Olympic skier who competed for Great Britain. The Mapelli Mozzi family's ancestral seat is the Villa Mapelli Mozzi in the Bergamo province of northern Italy, a historic estate that has been the family for generations. The hereditary title of Count was granted to the family in 1913 by King Victor Emmanuel III, and while the Italian Republic no longer officially recognizes such titles, Edoardo has used the courtesy title throughout his adult life. It is part of his identity, and more importantly, it is part of his brand. On his mother's side, the lineage is equally notable. His mother, Nicola Burrows, was appointed a member of the Order of the British Empire in 2016 for her charitable work. Her family tree connects to Sir Robert Abraham Burrows, a businessman and Liberal Party politician of the early 20th century. His mother later married Christopher Shale, a conservative politician and businessman who died suddenly in 2011. Edoardo has an older sister, Natalia, and a younger half-brother, Albie Shale, who has been involved in some of Edoardo's charitable ventures. One of those ventures is Cricket Builds Hope, a British Rwandan charity that Edoardo co-founded with the goal of constructing Rwanda's first grass wicket cricket ground, now known as the Gahanga International Cricket Stadium. The organization grew from a vision that his late stepfather Christopher Shale had before his death, and Edoardo stepped in to carry it forward. It is the kind of story that plays well in profiles and charity galas. Noble lineage meets philanthropic mission. But it is only one side of a much larger and more complicated picture. In 2007, at just 23 years old, Edoardo founded Bonda, a luxury property development and interior design company based in London. The premise he built it on was straightforward. He believed the high-end property market was producing spaces that looked impressive but felt sterile, showrooms rather than homes. Bonda would do things differently, creating spaces that felt lived in, incorporating custom-designed furniture alongside vintage pieces, and building an aesthetic that aged well rather than dated quickly. That was the pitch. And for a while, the business remained relatively modest, a boutique firm operating in London's premium residential market. But Bonda's growth trajectory shifted noticeably in the years following Edoardo's marriage to Princess Beatrice in 2020. What had been a respected niche operation began expanding at a pace that drew attention. New projects were announced across multiple continents. The client base widened. The price points climbed. By 2022, Bonda announced its first Australian venture, the Masthead Ocean Club on the Gold Coast, a development of just 28 apartments with entry-level pricing above $5 million each. It featured a champagne and wine lounge, a whiskey and cigar room, and complimentary BMW electric cars for residents. This was not boutique development anymore. This was ultra-luxury on a global scale. Then in 2025, Bonda unveiled a London project in the Chelsea Barracks area of Belgravia valued at $74 million. By early 2026, upcoming developments have been announced in Miami, Mumbai, New York, Dubai, Milan, Surrey, and the Cotswolds. There were also reports of a private jet venture in progress, signaling an expansion well beyond anything Bonda had originally been designed to do. The timing of all this growth raised eyebrows in property circles. There were those who questioned whether Edoardo's royal connection had acted as a door opener in markets where trust and social positioning are everything. In the ultra-high net worth world of luxury real estate, who you are associated with matters enormously. A developer with a direct line to the British royal family carries a certain weight that pure business credentials alone cannot replicate. Edoardo himself was not entirely unaware of the scrutiny. He has spoken publicly about his business philosophy and his vision for what Bonda represents. But when it comes to the harder questions about client lists, about who exactly is behind the purchases, about how much his royal connections have shaped the company's fortunes, the answers have been far less forthcoming. Before Edoardo was a royal husband and a globally expanding property developer, he was a man building a life with someone else entirely. Her name is Dara Huang, and she represents the chapter in Edoardo's story that many people either do not know about or have chosen to overlook. Dara Huang was born in Florida to Taiwanese immigrant parents. Her father worked as a NASA rocket scientist, a background that set the tone for a childhood defined by discipline and intellectual ambition. She earned her undergraduate degree from the University of Florida before completing a master's degree in architecture at Harvard University, one of the most competitive programs in the world. She went on to found her own firm, Design House Liberty, building a reputation in architecture and interior design that extended across major international projects. Her work has included contributions to significant cultural and residential developments in London and New York, and she has by any measure built a formidable independent career. Edoardo and Dara met in 2015. Within 2 years, they were engaged. In 2016, before the engagement, they had already welcomed a son together, Christopher Wolf Mapelli Mozzi, known as Wolfie. This was no passing relationship. It was a family. And then, with very little warning, it ended. The breakdown came in 2018, and the timing of that breakdown is where the story becomes genuinely uncomfortable. According to multiple reports, the split between Edoardo and Dara occurred just weeks before rumors began circulating that Edoardo had begun seeing Princess Beatrice. There was no extended period of separation, no clear pause between chapters. One relationship ended, and almost immediately another appeared to begin, and that second relationship was with a member of the British royal family. Dara Huang has spoken about that period with a candor that, once you read it, is difficult to forget. She has described it as one of the most difficult times in her life, noting that she was left as a single mother with a young child while simultaneously navigating the professional and financial pressures of running her own business. In her own words, she described Edoardo as having been the father of her child who left as quickly as he came, a statement that conveyed not just hurt, but a fundamental disillusionment about the nature of the relationship she had believed herself to be in. The situation that followed the breakup was unconventional by any standard. Despite the circumstances of the split, Dara and Edoardo maintained a relationship of unusual closeness. Reports from early 2020 describe Dara still cutting Edoardo's hair and occasionally buying him clothes, details that might seem trivial but pointed to something more significant beneath the surface. This was not a clean break. It was a relationship that had been restructured rather than ended. To their credit, All parties involved have made sustained and visible efforts to handle the co-parenting arrangement with maturity. Dara has spoken publicly about Wolfie having two sets of parents working together, and Princess Beatrice has been described as taking on the role of what she herself calls a bonus mom. Sarah Ferguson has spoken of Wolfie as a grandson. It is genuinely a more gracious outcome than many situations of this kind produce. But the grace of the present arrangement does not erase the questions about how the transition from one life to another happened in the first place. When Edoardo and Princess Beatrice announced their engagement in September 2019, the royal calendar assumed a familiar shape. A large ceremony was planned for May 29, 2020 at the Chapel Royal in St. James's Palace. Guest lists were being managed. The global media apparatus was preparing to cover another royal wedding in the traditional way. Then everything changed. By early 2020, public gatherings of any meaningful size had become impossible, and the original plans were suspended. For months, it was unclear whether the wedding would happen at all that year or when. But on July 17, 2020, Princess Beatrice and Edoardo Mapelli Mozzi got married, and almost nobody knew it was happening until it was done. The ceremony took place at the Royal Chapel of All Saints in Windsor, with fewer than 20 guests present. There was no advance announcement, no crowds, no televised procession, just a quiet ceremony in a small chapel attended by a handful of family members, including Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip, whose presence lent the occasion a gravity that its scale might otherwise have lacked. Beatrice wore not a newly commissioned designer gown, but a vintage dress borrowed from her grandmother and reworked for the occasion. The photographs released afterward were few and carefully selected, enough to satisfy the public's curiosity without revealing too much. It was, in almost every respect, the opposite of what royal weddings are typically designed to be. The wedding's private nature was partly circumstantial, shaped by restrictions that were entirely outside the couple's control. But the result was a marriage that entered the public record with far less scrutiny than a more conventional royal ceremony would have attracted. The speed of everything, from the first public sighting of them as a couple in early 2019 to the engagement in September of that year to a secret wedding barely a year later, left very little space for the usual level of examination that royal partnerships tend to receive. For the first several years of their marriage, things remained relatively settled. In September 2021, their daughter Sienna Elizabeth Mapelli Mozzi was born. In January 2025, a second daughter, Athena Elizabeth Rose Mapelli Mozzi, arrived several weeks premature. The family appeared to be